Howdy, historians. How's it going? Welcome to part two of our look at China. Last time we were together, we were checking out some more of the ancient dynasties in Chinese history, saw some important ideas developing like legalism, it's better to be strong than virtuous, and then people respect that strong government. Religious and philosophical ideas like Taoism that say government is bad, and we start to see the suppression of religion in China. Confucianism and the five relationships and the worship of elders, and ancestors, which all show us a lot of really important ideas. What we were really seeing in China Part 1 is that there are some important ideas that make Chinese culture and history operate the way that it does. Older people are more important than younger people. Men are historically considered more important than women in many ways, although that's kind of all of world history, unfortunately. And strong leaders that demand the respect of the people are the most successful leaders in Chinese history. So all of these ideas are going to continue to build, and we're going to see them as today we start to look at what are known as the imperial dynasties and their impacts. So the last time in China Part 1, it was the ancient dynasties and their ideals, the ideas that influence China today. Now we're going to start to look at the imperial dynasties and their impact, what these dynasties are and how they impact Chinese history in the past and also in the present. So the first dynasty that we're going to take a look at, as you can see today, is the Qin dynasty. Qin, pronounced Qin. This is the dynasty that gives China its name. Okay, now some important things going on here with the Qin dynasty. You can see it's relatively short-lived. It's only around for 15 years, 221 to 206 BC. However, the Qin dynasty reunified China after a period of decentralization, and they did so using legalism. So it was legalism that led to the reunification that the Qin dynasty was able to usher in for China. So the doctrine of legalism guided the Qin Empire, and they emphasized strict adherence to a very strict legal code, a very strict set of laws. And the emperor had absolute power. So before this, remember we had talked about that spring and autumn period. There was this time of decentralization. After that, there was actually another time period called the Warring States period, where it was also decentralization. So China had been in a state of decentralization for about 500 years before the Qin dynasty comes in. So for 500 years, China has not been unified. Then the Qin dynasty comes in, takes everybody over, and institutes strict legalism and is able to reunify the empire. So people see this and they go, you know what? The Qin dynasty was successful because they were able to use legalism, because they had this strict set of laws that they demanded the people stay loyal to, and because the emperor was so strong and had so much centralized authority. People see this and they go, well, if it worked for them, it's going to work for us, right? It's a copycat world. So because the Qin Empire used such strict legalism and used it so effectively, other dynasties after will also start to use this same type of setup, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. And the emperor was very brutal. He was rough. He silenced any political opposition, which usually silencing means killing any political opposition. He had no problem killing and getting rid of scholars that disagreed with him. He had no problem burning books that disagreed with him and his ideas. So the emperor was very, very strict. He was also just an interesting guy. Emperor Shi Huangdi. He also is the emperor. Maybe you've seen these pictures before of this terracotta army. It's these like clay soldiers that we found in 1974. It's this massive tomb for Emperor Shi. There were 7,000 terracotta warriors made, over 600 horses, over 100 chariots. The emperor built this thinking that it would help him and protect him in the afterlife. So in 1974, we found the Qin emperor's tomb, and we found this massive terracotta army. Very strong, very strict, but very effective. So people are going to follow this lead, and legalism now is like the way of doing things for the dynasties of China. All right, now another thing that the Qin dynasty is known for is starting the Great Wall of China. Great Wall of China, something a lot of people know at least a little bit about, like you've probably at least heard about the Great Wall of China. It's something we'll talk about here and there as we go throughout the unit. So you can see the Great Wall here built in this northern area. Then there's a little bit of a southern portion as well. All right, so that's where the actual Great Wall is being built. You can see everything shaded in as part of the Qin Empire, and then you can see the capital and the major cities as well. Now, they built the Great Wall during this time to keep the Mongolians out. The Mongolians are hanging out up here just north of modern-day China in what is today modern-day Mongolia. The Chinese and the Mongolians are always fighting for control in this area. The Mongolians were very, very fierce warriors, very effective warriors. So the Great Wall is always being built to keep people out, which actually says a lot about Chinese history too, that they're going to eventually build this massive wall to keep people out. They're going to eventually let some people in at times, but in more of China's history, it's about isolation, and they feel that that's going to be something that's good for them. But the Great Wall was started during this time, during the Qin Empire, to keep the Mongolians out, and we'll see that that wall grow over time. It's usually primarily there to keep the Mongolians out, and then last big thing for the Qin dynasty is they started to unify the language. So the written language of Chinese starts to be more unified at this time, which is good for us because then it's easier to study their history. If there's a written language that is uniform and everyone can go back and look at it, and we know that everything kind of like means the same thing, right? That's a good thing for historians. So lots of development at this time in the Qin dynasty, writing down the language, writing down their laws, writing down their history, starting to build the Great Wall. But the biggest thing, of course, that I spent the most time on is that they're using legalism, and that is able to reunify China after 500 years of decentralization. So with the Qin dynasty was so powerful, it names China, and then other people start to follow their lead and use legalism to keep the country united. Right? The Great Wall is a big idea too, right? The Great Wall is there to keep people out, and it leads to stability and success. Eventually, we'll see other Chinese dynasties and moments in history where they say, you know what, we need to keep people out and we need to isolate, because it's in those times when we have our best history. So Qin dynasty is a big one. Okay, two other dynasties on this slide. The Han dynasty. So now we're going over the zero marker. This is 202 BC to 220 AD. So we're doing the flip here. We're flipping over into a new time period here. Alright, so yeah, flipping over a new time period here with the Han Dynasty. Alright, so couple important things for the Han Dynasty. Very well known for great advances in art and sciences and expansion of the empire. But the biggest thing for the Han Dynasty is that they opened up the Silk Road. Now this is something that's come up here and there throughout our class, whether it's talking about Marco Polo and going on the Silk Road, or that it was responsible for a lot of cultural diffusion during various time points in European history. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about the printing press. The Silk Road is this massive trade network. So this is the first time that we see the Chinese dynasties and emperors allowing outside influence to really come in a large, specific, well-regulated way. So you can see the Silk Road here, this massive trade network that weaves itself all the way from the Roman Empire all the way over to China. The Han were the first dynasty to open this up and started to open up trade connections with the Western world. And this was actually good for everybody else, more so than the Chinese, because the Chinese were more advanced and more developed than basically all other civilizations in the world at this time. So everyone else really started to learn from China. We'll see some emperors like to keep the Silk Road open. Some will close it because they don't like the outside interference from the outside world. But we'll see a common idea that this is typically good for everybody else more so. It's better, like more influential and more positive for the outside world than it is for the Chinese, because the Chinese were way ahead in everything that they were doing at this time: art, architecture, science, printing press, gunpowder, things like that. But we'll start to see more cultural diffusion, and of course we know that's a good thing. So thank you, Han Dynasty, for opening up that Silk Road. Europe would have totally different history if the Silk Road wasn't there. Then there's the Sui Dynasty, 589 to 618. Now you can see we're doing a big skip here. right? The Han Dynasty was 220 AD. Now we're fast forwarding to 589. Now there were a couple other different dynasties and time periods in between here, but what we really saw in between the Han Dynasty and the Sui Dynasty was another period of decentralization, where there were lots of different groups fighting for power. Well, the Sui Dynasty comes back in 589. They're able to reunify the country. They go through a process of reunification, and how do they do it? We all know the answer because it's there, but we know it from what we saw on the previous slide about the Qin dynasty. The Sui dynasty was able to go through the process of reunification because they once again used legalism. Very harsh regime. You will either agree with us or you will die. You will follow the laws or you will die. Everything is about respecting the strength of the centralized government so that they can keep a centralized government. So again, we're just like re-upping on this precedent of this significant moment in Chinese history that the government needs to be strong, not virtuous, not kind, strong to keep the country united. So we see that with the Qin, we see that with the Sui, we'll see that honestly still today with the Communist Party and the way that they rule in China as well. So then the last dynasty for today that I want to look at is the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644. Again, we're skipping around a little bit. It's not like we're going to go over every single dynasty. And again, you don't necessarily need to be like feverishly writing down all these years. Think about the big picture stuff that we are discussing for each dynasty. The years are just there to help you with the chronology. Okay, so Ming Dynasty. Couple things. One, they were very well known for their art and their culture. Some people call the Ming Dynasty one of the high points of Chinese civilization, one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. There was lots of good things going on here. Beautiful artwork. The Ming Dynasty is very well known for their porcelain, for their vases, their vases, their fancy dinnerware, which today you would call your china, if you and your family have that, right? Like once a year or twice a year, like Thanksgiving and like Christmas, you pull out the fancy china, right? The fancy cookware, the fancy flatware, the silver, right? Well, a lot of that is because of its makeup. It's porcelain, right? Porcelain was created in China, and the Chinese were the best at it. So the Ming were well known to have these vases, really, really pretty artwork too. You can just see a nice little piece here of a Chinese, kind of like floral arrangement, really pretty. But they had a vibrant culture and really, really good art. The Ming Dynasty was also known for trade and expansion. So the Ming Dynasty did a lot of trading with other areas around the world. The Ming Dynasty actually allowed a few different admirals and their navy to go out and sail the world. There's actually some evidence that some Chinese sailors could have made it all the way to modern-day South Carolina in the United States. We have found some archaeological evidence and some artifacts left behind that the Chinese probably made it all the way to North America. Now, the Ming Dynasty was open for all of this movement and for this trade, but we're going to see the next dynasty that comes in shun this trade and say that the Chinese shouldn't be going out and doing this. So a lot of their records were destroyed, so we don't exactly know all of the different areas that they went to, but there was a lot of trade at this time. You can also see that they expanded a lot. So they start to expand the amount of territory that they were controlling compared to previous empires that had been in there. So they expanded the physical size of China through large aggressive military actions, and then they also did a lot of foreign trade, and their economy overall was just thriving at this time. They also had a very high agricultural output. A lot of farm products were being created at this time. So as we look at the ancient dynasties, not the ancient dynasties, I forgot to update those, the imperial dynasties and their impacts, what we're really seeing is that legalism is where it's at. Every time there's a period of reunification, it's because someone's coming in and they're starting to use legalism. We also see there's more foreign trade going on, whether it be going out and sailing during the Ming Dynasty, although the Ming Dynasty also kept the Silk Road open, right? If we just grab this here real quick, there's the Silk Road. There's that dotted line right there. Okay, so whether it be sailing or the Silk Road, we're starting to see some influence from the outside world. The Great Wall is also an example of influence from the outside world because they're building it to keep the Mongolians out. So in this imperial dynastic time period, it's really questions about should the Chinese allow the outside world in, yes or no? The overall answer to that question is going to be no. When Chinese historians look back on it, both in their past and really today, they say the best moments in Chinese history come during times of isolation. So keep people out. We also start to see these ideas reinforced of a strict centralized government. So those are the couple big ideas we want to pull out today, and then a lot of beautiful art and culture. So hop over, take the quiz, let me know if you have any questions. See you next time.